Outriders is the latest game from Polish developer People Can Fly, veterans of the shooting genre whose previous work has included the demon-slaying Painkiller, Frat Boy's Choice Bulletstorm, and their partnership with Epic Games even landed them being the lead developer on the Gears of War spin-off Judgment. Now they've been picked up by Square Enix to add their own brand of ballistic anarchy to that most troubled of genres, the looter shooter. A style of game popularised by Gearbox with their fan-favourite series Borderlands, which took the randomised loot hunting of Diablo 2 and applied it to a first-person shooter. Then Destiny came along and saw the limitless potential to hopify the genre and keep its players as part of its ecosystem eternally. After a rocky start to that game's beginnings, the loot genre has gone from disaster to disaster. Every major publisher has had their hand at making this cursed format work. EA had Anthem, Ubisoft has The Division, Bethesda has Fallout 76, Square has got The Avengers, and each one of them has had its own issues with bugginess, server stability, disillusioned communities, and none of them have made the publishers the kind of financial returns that they were hoping for. Outriders seeks to buck this trend by separating its looter shooter from the live service trend that has turned what was once a cool idea into a ridiculed meme. And I'll be perfectly honest, I absolutely thought that this was a live service game until I saw a trailer insisting otherwise. I mean, I can't imagine why I thought it was a live service game. It's not like it bears any resemblance to Destiny. Oh. Wow, even that cursor is one Destiny-ass looking cursor. Okay, so in all seriousness, if you are going to say that you have no live service elements, then your point of comparison stops being Destiny and it starts being Borderlands. The thing is that I remember being able to pause Borderlands if I was playing in single player, and I could also play the damn thing totally offline, neither of which I can do in Outriders. Which begs the question, if this has no live service elements and it's proud of that fact, then why does it keep the back door open for it to potentially sneak in? Was a live service game the intention and then the idea got abandoned, or are they hedging their bets in case the game explodes in popularity and it would be a really good idea to start adding them to optimize profitability later on down the line? Regardless, if they were going to go after any model, I'm a much bigger Borderlands guy than I am a Destiny guy, because I like my classes to feel distinct, I like my loot choices to mean something, and I like my skill trees to not be skill stumps. And I don't want to have to wait until I get to the end game for all of that to happen. And on that front, good news. The second Outriders puts a class selection screen in front of your face and you make your choice, they immediately give you a power that is unique to your class, something that helps you immediately understand the class's personality and style of play. I played as two classes during the demo, the time-bending Trickster and the artillery-based Technomancer. Their different playstyles are baked into their characters from the very beginning. Not some theoretical goal for later down the line if you manage to snag the right loot or have put 20 points into a skill tree after 30 hours of play. People Can Fly achieve this by giving each character a different way to heal, something that is constantly needed at every stage of play. This makes it necessary for you to approach the game differently depending on which class you've picked, something I really look for in a game with different classes. The Trickster is a close-range class who heals and gets a shield if they're near enemies when they kill them. The Technomancer is a bit more of a glass cannon, so that means they're constantly healing from the damage they do, rather than just from the kill shots. Thing is, the Technomancer heals more the more damage they do, and they get a bonus to damage the further they are away from the enemies they're shooting. So if you want to keep your Outrider alive, keep them at the back armed with a sniper rifle, while the Trickster does better getting in the thick of it with a shotgun or an SMG and taking out several foes at once. Unfortunately, there does seem to be a fairly prominent hierarchy when it comes to the classes, and while People Can Fly have undoubtedly tried to balance out these classes, some classes are more balanced than others. Let's look at the initial skills these two classes start off with. The Trickster swings a temporal katana through all the enemies in front of them, slicing a cut through time itself, slowing your enemies as their organs disintegrate, leaving them as nothing more than a skeleton that doesn't know it's already dead. The Technomancer throws a grenade. Well, technically it's a proximity grenade, and while that's a nice idea because you can use it to set traps for enemies closing in on your position, it's not really that kind of game. You'll mostly either be using it to kill enemies dug into cover or to throw it in the face of an enemy that's charging you down. Its other skills include mortar strikes and turrets, and it is fun watching a row of enemies' life bars crumble as they get hit with a barrage of rockets is extremely satisfying, but all of the other classes have supernatural skills that tear the world apart and put it back together again. The Technomancer's skills in comparison feel like nothing more than Call of Duty kill streaks. I would also not attempt to play this long range class solo, as the game has a lot of rushdown and the options you have to keep a distance between you and your enemies are limited. The proximity mine doesn't have the splash damage to be too effective in that way, and it has a ridiculously long cooldown considering its power level. It feels like the best tool at your disposal to keeping your enemies away from you would be your other teammates. The more close range characters are acting as a buffer between you and all of the hard and fast melee attackers. But like I said, I did have fun with this class, especially later on when I got my hands on the better long range weapons. But once again, the game runs at too fast a pace for lining up headshots for that to be a reliable strategy. However, when I switched over to the Trickster, that was when Outriders really started making sense. Outriders feels like they nail the close range characters way more than the others, and will hopefully patch the other ones to bring them up to speed. However, at the moment it really feels like the Trickster is the only one and people aren't complaining about in the forums. It just feels more powerful, and there are less situations where you as a player feel helpless to overcome your circumstances and are able to get yourself out of trouble more consistently. Apart from that, when it comes to the gameplay, we've got skill trees with lots of diverse options. Each class comes with 3 distinct branches to go down, giving you 3 different build options for each different class at least. 2 things that really impressed me about how People Can Fly have built their skill trees. One was the fact that you could reset the skill tree at any time with no penalty. No currency, you don't have to visit a specific vendor, nothing. You just go straight into the menu and hit the button that allows you to wipe all of the skill points you've spent so far. 2 is that the different branches can cross over, so if you start going down the Trickster's assassin route, at some point you can make a turn into its Harbinger tree without having to start from scratch. Then there's the loot. Loot in Outriders comes in one of 5 rarities: common, unusual, rare, epic and legendary. Towards the end of the demo, I found several rare drops, and while that might not sound too impressive, after all it is only the 3rd tier rarity on a 5 tier scale, even that loot was way more interesting than the stuff I would have found halfway through a run of Destiny's original campaign, and we're only in the demo. What made it interesting was its mod. A mod in Outriders is something that goes beyond the simple stat boost and does something actually cool and interesting, or at least it attempts to be. For example, I found a shotgun with the mod Fusion Blast. That means when I shoot an enemy, a shockwave emanates from them and damages any enemy standing close. I also had an assault rifle that petrified my enemies in volcanic ash, immobilizing them. These mods were the missing piece in the gameplay combination that really made Outriders sing. Already in the first 3 hours of the game I had a cohesive build going. Most of my armour increased my max health, and my weapons and skill tree choices all boosted the health I was leeching from enemies. Then I had a mod that meant every time I killed an enemy, the health I got from the enemies increased by 20% for 20 seconds. This was every single killing shot. In a single player game where I'm the only one killing, this made the bonus last entire encounters, and I was healing myself way faster than enemies could damage me. And this is just in the first 2 or 3 hours of the game. In other games of this genre, you'll need to play the campaign twice for that kind of choice. This is what makes the moment-to-moment gameplay of Outriders so compelling. Those OP combinations that make you feel like both a badass and a genius. Which is a good thing because the basic combat can be fairly clunky. Like a lot of multiplayer games of this style, Outlanders requires you to bring your A game to be perfect and flawless if you don't want to die before you hit the next checkpoint. Unfortunately, that is not a standard that the game sets for itself. The game runs on a system of snap to cover, and the second you point your cursor over some cover, an icon pops up, at least that's the idea, and your character has the option to run straight to it. But no matter how definitively your cursor hovers over a more advantageous position, it may never grant you the context to run to it. Or it might catch you on the terrain, leaving you jogging on the spot eternally in the open, forcing your character to catch bullets with their teeth. Sometimes there'll be a chest-high wall right in front of you, and the cover button won't acknowledge it. Pretty poor form from the game's primary defensive mechanic. Yes, I've heard the sentiment from other critics telling us that the cover isn't there for the players, it's there for the AI to hide behind, giving the players more incentive to push forward and play in a more risky, aggressive fashion. And as true as that may be, no developer has ever discouraged the player from using a mechanic by making it buggy. That is just bad design. Then there are the mechanics that feel like they belong in a much slower game. As mentioned before, Outriders is pretty fast paced, especially at higher difficulties, and some of the mechanics feel too slow for that style of play. Manually aiming your cooldown powers as a Technomancer, for example, requires one too many button presses. You have to hold down the button to bring up the manual aiming reticle, then confirm it with another button press. It's just too slow an ask when the enemies are so quick on the draw and none of them ever seem to miss. Then there's the reloading mechanics. Now, I know there are options that absolutely shred the time to reload as you go down the skill tree, but even then the initial reload times are excruciating for a game where every bad guy is all over you every single second. From a gameplay perspective, Outriders is a game that requires you to be immaculate, which is hard to take from a game that requires you to be so comfortable with its own flaws. More than once I spawned into a level missing my heads up display, had my character clipping through the scenery when it engaged in auto run, my grenades got caught in the ceiling, and the game just doesn't seem to be in the state a finished product should be days before you're asking people to pay £50 for it. The game's quest hub in particular was an area where the frame rate noticeably dropped, probably due to all of the unique animation scripts that are constantly running on a loop here and appear nowhere else in the game. Story-wise, Outriders begins with a prologue. Your character has just been released from cryostasis, decades after hitching a ride aboard the last ship out of Earth, as humanity consumed itself in face of a pending apocalypse. The ship was bound for the nearest planet that could sustain human life, a picturesque little place called Enoch, complete with rolling hills, exotic wildlife, and vast sandstone buttes. Buttes? Yeah, that's what they're called, buttes. Your character is among the first wave of passengers that gets to wake up in order to begin the process of making the planet capable of sustaining human life. This section of the demo was a bit exposition heavy, and its characters are all stock types that came out almost unaltered from gaming's AAA handbook. However, it does offer up some unexpectedly detailed hard sci-fi elements, like how the planet can only be populated a little bit at a time so that they can be sure they've got enough food to feed all of the new mouths, or how an interstellar journey would take several decades rather than just relying on the apocryphal sci-fi trope of lightspeed travel that so many other sci-fi worlds have used as a crutch. For the first 5 minutes, it looks as if we're in for a surprisingly mature story about how the last remnants of humanity made the most of their second chance on a land of unspoilt plenty. And then the developers remembered that they were people can fly.
And do the right thing, or I'm gonna have to... Let's see how fast you can run!
How many times did I tell you to shut up? Welcome to the Valley of Death, asshole!
All of this is fucking insane!
Oh yeah, it is!
Help me!
Yes, this developer looked at all of the idyllic optimism of the opening and then realised, wait, this isn't us. We're people can fly, damn it. We made Bulletstorm and Painkiller. We're the guys who pioneered the storytelling technique of saying the word dick 3 times a sentence for 12 hours. Yes, no sooner than your character comes out of cryostasis, they get shoved straight back in and spends an additional 30 years on top of the 80 they've already spent on ice when they evacuated Earth. Why did the character wake up all the first time then? Why all the preamble? Why introduce us to 3 or 4 characters, have our character build relationships with them, only for the scriptwriter to then wipe them out with the same kind of indifferent malice that a bowling ball shows the pins it knocks down? The action then transitions into a Mad Max knockoff where the desperation and misery are so tangible you can taste it in the air. Where once you were watching the wild alien buffalo roam, you're now being driven through a tunnel of dangling corpses, and those were the lucky ones. This is a world where the chaos is so all-consuming, the mortality rate so high, you wonder how there are any human beings left alive to still be subjugated to this torturous existence. Every single line of dialogue from this moment forward is to communicate to the player one thing and one thing alone. Things are fucked.
You have no idea how bad it is, Outrider. You've been gone too long to understand how truly fucked we are.
People are dying because of him. Without the supply route open...
They all die. My war is with the worst of our kind.
So whether you like it or not, you're stuck here in the mud and shit like the rest of us.
Anyone without a ration card gets nothing. Anyone caught stealing gets a bullet.
How long do you think? Down to the bottom?
Well, most of us were dead that first day.
We thought we escaped the apocalypse. We thought we could start over again here. But we were wrong. I was wrong.
You're,
God, listen to that line reading, so torturously dramatic. And despite the game's insistence that we need to lose the past and move on, it's intent on giving you reminders of your old life on Earth. One of the quest givers is a collector of old artifacts, which she sends you on the hunt for, and the game has a surprising amount of nooks and crannies, which either contains a loot chest, the real kind by the way, the in-game kind, not the kind you pay for with microtransactions, or it contains a journal entry with such fascinating titles as Year 1 on Enoch, Textile Manufacturing. Yeah, no thanks, not reading 5 paragraphs of that when I could be turning my enemies into temporal ash in my time bubble. Anyway, a few miscellaneous thoughts while I wrap up what I think about the game, and what it's going to need to do to make people happier to pay full price for it. And make no mistake about it, this is a game that is going to need patching and rebalancing, and frankly, it feels set up for it. The always online nature of the game feels as if it's there to see what the players are up to, so that people can change the game accordingly. Like they knew they couldn't get the feel of the game right away and were waiting for that all-important player data to see how it would really perform out in the wild. For example, while I was more than happy with the variety of skills on offer, I was disappointed to see that there was one skill that basically 3 out of the 4 classes share. It's a skill that soups up one clip of ammunition to make your gun shoot twice as effective until you have to switch guns or reload. It's by far and away the most boring skill in the game, and typically, it's the most OP by far. Using it, I was shredding bosses that I had previously struggled with. One thing I personally would like is more information about how the enemies operate, especially the bosses. The bosses and mini-bosses in this game have classes and powers, like you do, but there's nothing in the game to explain them to you. And I kept wondering why one of the first mini-bosses I fought was respawning after I killed him. It turns out that he's got an ability where if you killed him while he has that ability active, that would see him respawn at full health. And the only indication I had of this was a tiny icon underneath his health bar that looked like a phoenix. I mean, look at that thing. You'd need a 4K telly to see it from the sofa, but God knows how this game would run at 4K. And there was nothing in the game that I could see to help you identify this mechanic. I mean, honestly, and I know this is the standard by now, but developers deliberately making their mechanics obscure so you have to go on social media or YouTube to look them up and increase your game's trendability score is one thing I am sick to death of. I mean, people can fly. You have an entire screen dedicated to lore and journal entries. Would it kill you to put something actually useful in there? Oh, and just before I move on, this boss is another reason not to play as the Technomancer, because your turrets don't know when it's a good idea to stop shooting. So if you've got one active, they could kill this boss without you knowing about it, and then he comes back to life at full health. Again! The world tier idea is a good one. Not sure if it's original to this game, but it's definitely the first time I've seen it. World tiers are levels of difficulty that reward you with better loot. There are 15 in total, and from what I gather, you're not supposed to necessarily unlock them in a linear fashion. Think of it more like a new way of looking at difficulty. You progress to harder world tiers until you find the difficulty that you're most comfortable with. Now, the future of Outriders may look bright, but that's only because the rest of 2021 looks so dark. It's the kind of game that always seems to have an audience looking for its next hit, and Outriders is going to be the only way for them to get it until Halo Infinite comes out, and that doesn't even have a proper release date yet. Regardless, if certain technical aspects of this game remain as inconsistent as they are now, or get worse upon release, remember, multiplayer games like this are notorious for their rough launches. Gamers might be more inclined to go back and replay old games instead of putting up with this one. which would be a shame because the generosity People Can Fly have shown in regards to their build diversity and their loot variants makes a game where the moment-to-moment action is exciting and frantic and even more compelling.